Just 6 weeks to go. Is it really true no one knows there's a mayor's race going on? More violence this time on school grounds. A 15-year-old student shot dead. A school district looking for answers. But is there a workable fix? Plus, the rest of the week's news from pot to potholes.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome, I'm Nick Haynes, and thank you for joining us on this journey through the news of the week. From the stories you might have missed to those you saw yet are still confused, we have your back pouring through the week's most impactful stories. Our Mr. Up-to-Date on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske. From 41 Action News, reporter Stephen Dial. From KCTV5 News, Caroline Sweeney. And political analyst, columnist and blogger, Dave Helling. In a little more than 6 weeks from now, Kansas Cityans will decide who they want to succeed Sly James as the next mayor of the city, or at least narrow down that field of 11 candidates to just 2. In a column this week in the Kansas City Star, Dave Helling calls it the invisible race and laments how few people can actually even name who's running. But is that really an accurate portrait of what's happening? Stephen Dial, I was at Costco, and I was only picking up a couple of items around the corner from here, and I was there about 2 hours. So many people came up to me wanting to tell me who they were voting for in the mayor's race.
Well, that's good, because I can hardly find people who can tell me maybe 5 candidates' names.
Wow, so Dave Helling is right?
I don't want to say that Dave Helling
is wrong. That's not possible.
I think that the point is, I would think that more people would be a little bit more fired up about this race and really looking at the people the person who will basically lead Kansas City into a new era with the airport and a lot of other things that are
Doesn't that tell you that the public is really satisfied? Otherwise, they'd be rising up with pitchforks if they were that unhappy.
I don't know if we can say that the public is satisfied with how the last 8 years have been going, but I think what this might show is that the public is facing some political fatigue with a very crowded race right now after a crowded race in November, and in the primary that we saw in August. The Kansas City area residents may just be kind of tired right now.
In some polls I've recently seen, more than 1 in 3 voters say they have no clue who they're going to vote for.
Yeah, I think that's going to change, Nick. I think Dr. Helling is spot on. People aren't engaged in this race right now. But pretty soon, within days, the mailers are going to start hitting mailboxes, and perhaps we'll see a candidate or 2 launch up on TV, in 3 or 4 weeks from now. And that'll begin to change the profile of this race in a dramatic way. I think your question is spot on, too, in the notion that people are pretty satisfied with where the city is right now. Mayor Sly James' approval ratings are through the roof, and that says something about where we are right now, but it's all going to change pretty quickly.
From the KCPT mailbag, yes, you do call and write to us. Glenn says he will support the candidate who can fix the massive potholes on his street. He's certainly not alone. The Kansas City 311 call center has received more than 1,400 pothole reports from frustrated citizens. Who is going to be the candidate most likely to get those fixed, or is fixated on those nitty-gritty infrastructure kinds of issues, Dave?
Well, it could be Steve Miller, who was the former head of the Transportation Department for the state of Missouri, and we've been sort of waiting for him to step forward and be the infrastructure guy. That really maybe hasn't happened yet. The city's budget was released yesterday. There's a 70% increase in spending in the new budget for street maintenance, which I think will be good news for people. In fact, the budget is pretty good news because revenues continue to grow without a tax increase. That suggests the economy is pretty healthy. But one of the things I was trying to talk about in that column, Nick, is not so much that it's been quiet so far, but that someone should or could step forward in the next couple of weeks and really grab a hold of the race through some mechanism, an announcement, a position, a mailer, a TV ad. Just pick something to separate yourself from the field. Otherwise, the sort of top tier that we've identified for months may stay in the top tier, that being Jolie Justice, Quinton Lucas, maybe Steve Miller, and some others. So we'll see, but I think what I was trying to illustrate is now's the time to make your move if you're going to make one.
Back to our KCPT mailbag, and Robert writes, the mayor is just one of 13 votes at the City Hall. Why is there such a huge disparity in media coverage of that race compared to the council member races? Is that because there are simply too many to cover? Caroline?
Well, I think when you're starting to look at, the mayoral race, yes, the city council member seats are extremely important considering the way the votes are spread out on the city council. But the mayor helps to set this agenda that the city council members will have to make decisions on. So until we can kind of feel out where this mayoral race is going, that city council race will have to fall into place.
And there's no question the mayor, Nick, is first among equals on the city council. He's the one who has the bully pulpit going forward, and that's why this race for mayor gets the attention that it does. He doesn't have more clout than any other council member, but he or she has the bully pulpit, and that matters.
Can I just say this quickly? The way we elect people in Kansas City is bizarre as well and makes it difficult. Caroline talked about fatigue. Do you realize if you have a full slate of candidates, in the primary, a voter will have to choose a mayor, 6 council candidates, and then the in-district council persons. That's 8 different races that a concerned voter will have to study, often with multiple candidates. No wonder Kansas Cityans are a little tired. That's a very hard thing to do. I've talked with some people about changing the way elections are run in Kansas City that might solve some of those problems, but that's really at play here as well.
One more just quick thing. There is a counterintuitive idea floating around among the political class right now. Roughly 50,000 voters voted in the primary back in 2011, the last time the city had a crowded primary field. But some projections for this time, Nick, suggest that as many as 90,000 people might vote, that once this race engages, all these candidates will draw a lot of attention, and lo and behold, people will turn out in this age of Trump to cast their ballots.
Now, back to our KCPT mailbag, and Sean asks, I would like at least a month without mention of KCI. I don't see why you guys feel the need to discuss this over and over and over. Sean, I'm with you. So why do you feel, panelists, the need to discuss this over and over and over again, Steve?
Well, for Sean, on behalf of all of us, I think security gets tired of seeing us come to the airport to do live shots. It's one of the most signature things that the city will do in this generation. An airport is your doormat to the city. It gives the first impression. It's important. I know we talk about it a lot. I don't want to say we overkill it because it's important and it's a lot of money involved.
Caroline.
So you say over and over and over, but we say money and promises, money and promises. This is a huge amount of money that the city is directing their attention toward, that taxpayers are directing their attention toward, that we're putting the focus on here in Kansas City, and promises. When we as Kansas Citians go out and place our vote, we're voting on some of the promises that these elected officials have made. And it's our job as journalists to make sure they can explain why they're kept or not.
Dave mentioned earlier the fatigue issue when it comes to voters, but on this issue, we hear a lot of fatigue about KCI, and I will say we even have production crew here at KCPT who say they don't want to see another shot, which is why I didn't even show you any of the video of KCI. So, okay, I'm trying to live up to that expectation that you have of us. Violence, though, topping the headlines again this week. The superintendent of the Kansas City, Missouri School District calling for a cure to the illness, as he describes it, after a 15-year-old student is shot to death outside the Central Academy of Excellence.
Cannot do this on our own, and people cannot expect the school district to solve all of the community problems. And it's definitely not fair to the family and the students that we have to serve that they don't feel that they can go to an event without something breaking out.
It happened while a basketball game was being played inside that school at the corner of Linwood and Indiana. The district's high schools require students and visitors to go through metal detectors to gain entry. The district has launched an extensive mentorship program to work with the students, and they say they're already working closely with the police department and local churches to help students better deal with conflict. I bring these changes up because this begs the question, what more can the school district actually do about this? Did anyone offer up any meaningful ideas this week, Caroline?
We had a lot of questions about what happens next and what the school district has been doing, and they kept reverting back to those mentorship programs, the things that they already have in place. But what I thought was really interesting coming from Dr. Bedell was that he said this isn't a KCPS issue, but I really think think what he should have said was, this is not just a KCPS issue. This is, a community issue, but to kind of separate the school district from the community, I think put a bad taste in people's mouths.
Two thoughts, Nick. You could make an argument that some of that security should have been extended outside the school once the kids were kicked out of the game. That might be something to think about. Having said that, we were talking about the race for mayor. They've been coming on the radio show and talking about, we asked them, what do you want to do about violence in this community? And I'm not hearing really any new ideas. I'm not really hearing any new ideas throughout the community. It may be because there aren't any more ideas worth exploring at this point. But this issue, this story continues to percolate. It comes up every few weeks on this program. Dr. Bedell has been through this many, many times. It's an ongoing tragedy, and the city still, I don't think, has really come to grips with paths forward here that might lead to significant change.
Is that the breakout issue you were talking about, Dave, when it came to these mayoral candidates?
Could be, but violent crime does not lend itself easily to global, simple solutions. It's all of it. It's more security. It's mentoring. It's fewer guns. It's conflict resolution. I was down at the budget hearing yesterday, and one of the groups that came before the city council was a group of teenagers, I think called iRise or RISE. It's a group of mentors who work with one another to try and work through conflicts, particularly for at-risk youth. And it just struck me that the group is like 15 kids, you get the sense that this has to be solved on a block by block, person by person, school by school basis, and not some global mayoral edict or solution or vote or ordinance that'll improve the situation. And that's why it's so difficult, and that's why we talk about it a lot on this program.
Steve.
It's exactly what he said. It's more than just saying, okay, what is the school district doing or what is city council doing? It has to take everyone involved to do this. Every death, every life is important. And, I know when we talked to the family, some were saying, security knew that this would escalate once they walked them out. But looking in the whole context, and, we can be, Monday morning quarterback, if there was an incident in the Sprint Center and police escorted myself and another person out, they're not going to walk me all the way to my car separate than the other person. So there's a lot of things that we have to change, and it starts in the community. Dr. Bedell was visually upset, and we can keep talking about it, and I don't know if there's the silver bullet is more solutions. It's trying to hammer home the ones that they're already working on.
Sly James, the current mayor, has talked about the need to have changes in gun laws. He's been frustrated by state lawmakers in Missouri not doing anything on that. He's supposed to have courted a better relationship with Governor Mike Parson, the new governor of Missouri. But I can't imagine that Governor Mike Parson is going to improve changes to gun laws in the state of Missouri.
No. Mike Parson, a former county sheriff, a conservative Republican, Nick, he's not inclined to change gun laws given backing from the NRA and the like. And then you also have the counter argument. I've talked to police officers about this who say, you stop bringing, you put in new laws that say you can't possess handguns in this community. Given the number of handguns already out there, it would have hardly any effect whatsoever.
Now, gun homicides get far more attention in the popular press, but most gun deaths are the result of suicide. That issue back in the news this week, too, as a Kansas City, Missouri police officer disappears and after an extensive search is found dead in his car of a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
I can name every single police officer that's died in the line of duty since I've been on the job. I cannot come close to naming everybody that's chosen to take their own lives. That's how bad it is in our field.
Now, when it comes to news coverage, it's normally about police officers being besieged with having to deal with citizens suffering from mental trauma. Rarely do we give much thought to the anxiety and emotional well-being of the people behind the badge, Steve.
Right, and a law enforcement organization, the name escapes me, but they said in the past 3 years, the #1 in line of duty death is suicide. A lot of officers are taking their own lives, and we need to have this conversation. More and more people nationally have been having the conversation in general, especially in Johnson County, about students committing suicide. But this affects everyone, and I think this unfortunate incident kind of brings light to something of people thinking about reaching out to officers as well.
The border wall is big news again, and there was a snippet in a national news report about Kansas. Yes, as the governor of California and New Mexico have announced they're pulling their National Guard troops from the border, they also called on other states, including singling out Kansas, to do so. It was former Governor Jeff Collier who approved the sending of Kansas National Guard to the border before he left office. But are they still there? Did they ever go? Is new Governor Laura Kelly committed to that mission? Do we know?
Well, I'm working on this to find an answer to that, but we do know that there were some troops from Fort Riley that were sent down, Army troops, and there were pictures posted on the Engineering Battalion Facebook page around Christmas. There was also a report that saying these troops could have been home by Christmas, but we know that Laura Kelly is going to have to review all of these requests and these changes, and it sounds like this is something she's going to be opposed to, considering what we're hearing from high-ranking Democrats.
Now, while President Trump claims there's an emergency situation at the border, in Kansas, Governor Laura Kelly declares a state of emergency at a place where there are already high walls, our prisons. At the heart of the declaration is the state's most crowded maximum security lockup in El Dorado, about a 30-minute drive northeast of Wichita. There have been a series of riots and uprisings there. The prison is housing far more inmates than it was designed for, and the governor says there's a chronic shortage of staff. How about more than 25% of all the uniform positions vacant? It's a job, by the way, that pays $15.75 an hour. That's the starting pay. Even lower, by the way, in Missouri. Is that the big issue?
Well, it's one of the huge issues, Nick. I think there are 85, 90 vacant positions down in the El Dorado facility. There were some specifics related to the disturbances there in 2017 and 2018, particularly in the way Kansas was moving prisoners from facility to facility. That frustrates inmates a lot of times. Family members have a harder time visiting. So that was a unique situation, but they don't have enough people to do what they do. And when employment is full or close to full as it is now, you have to pay a better wage if you want to get qualified people. Instead, what they've done in Kansas, and they're doing a bit in Missouri as well, is pay a lot of overtime. That adds to stress. Guards are tired, and that exacerbates an already bad situation. Governor Mike Parson in Missouri wants to close a prison. I think you're going to see more suggestions along those lines, not only in Kansas and Missouri, but across the country, as people realize this is an expensive thing to do and may not be the best way to reduce crime.
I'm going to get to you in a second, Stephen, but I want to point out I had 4 or 5 phone calls or emails this week from the U.S. Census Service saying they can't find anyone now to be census takers in the field. Yet when I asked about what the salary was for that, what is the pay? It is $17 an hour. And yet we have prison guards in Kansas at $15.75, less in Missouri. We're paying census people on a temporary basis higher wages.
Well, and that's a big issue, as Dave just said. You know, Nick, as time goes on, it becomes clearer and clearer in Kansas the wreckage that Governor Sam Brownback has left behind. This is but one more example. Higher education, public school funding, highway funding, vulnerable kids, no-bid contracts I wrote about this week used through the roof under the Brownback administration. Governor Kelly has said more than once, Nick, that she didn't realize, even as a sitting state senator who oversaw the state budget, just how bad things were. She's finding out now, and we all are as time goes along.
If it's a question of money, why is Kansas so reluctant to consider new revenue streams? One, medical marijuana, and another, sports betting. Bills on both measures introduced in the legislature. How much money would these efforts bring in, and where would that money go? You were doing the sports betting story this week,
Right, and I think sports betting has a better chance, definitely, of passing the legislature than something like medical marijuana. I've heard different numbers, so I don't want to just throw out one. I've heard as much as $100 million to the state. It just depends on the argument is who gets the cut and where can it happen. The casinos testified this week saying that, hey, we should be the only people where sports betting can happen. Some national betting organizations sent letters to the legislators saying that, hey, a majority of people in New Jersey and other states that haven't do it via the app. And so it's a matter of who gets the cut. The NBA said that they're for it. They want a safe way for people to sports wager, but they're also asking for 25 cents on every $100 bet. So the money is the big discussion of.
So we've got the sports betting covered from Stephen. What about medical marijuana? Is it less likely than sports betting in Kansas?
It's going to be a sticky point, but I think when you look at the changes that have happened in Missouri and the ongoing discussion about what's happening in Colorado and how that's flowing over the western Kansas border, it's definitely going to get more talking time than we've seen it in the past, but I just don't know if lawmakers are going to be able to move past it.
And can I just say, medical marijuana as a revenue raiser is probably problematic. The idea is to provide relief for patients and not put millions of extra dollars in the state treasury. We wrote a little bit about that. Gambling is different. Gambling, you do want the state to benefit to some degree. But on something like medical marijuana, it would be counterproductive if you raise the rate so much that it puts money in the treasury. By the way, the bill in Kansas would give veterans a preference for the first 60 days of a new law if medical marijuana comes to Kansas.
Now, speaking of marijuana, I noticed all the news stories this week about the first medical marijuana clinic opening in Kansas City, just off the streetcar line in the River Market. Why, Caroline Sweeney, are they opening now when I thought it was going to take a better part of a year to agree on all the licenses, all of the work in the regulations here necessary under this new voter-approved law?
Well, I think this is one of those get our feet wet, see what happens, test it out in real time. I think we all need to be have our eyes on this clinic and see what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks to see how these new laws are going to play out kind of in the real world.
They're only getting the certification for people, the patients. They're not actually going to get the marijuana from this clinic at this point in time, Steve.
I think that's right. I haven't covered it much, but that sounds right, yeah.
All righty. Well, just because you approve an issue at the ballot box, should your state lawmakers be required to abide by your wishes? There are efforts underway in Jefferson City this week to overturn the new minimum wage law you voted on in November and the voter-approved Clean Missouri Amendment. They've just voted overwhelmingly to disregard a component of the new law requiring legislators to open up their records, including their emails. One Kansas City lawmaker called it the most radical undermining of open records and transparency law in state history. But is that description overkill when a lot of the ads on Clean Missouri were really about lobbyist gifts, limiting campaign contributions, redistricting, not about open records?
Yeah. So I sat down via Skype and talked to Representative Shamed Dogan from the St. Louis area, and he's the one that proposed the original bill without the amendment that kind of has everyone back on their heels. He says when this bill was proposed, they were calling it Cleaner Missouri. It outlined a little bit more of what those gifts were supposed to look like, you know, kind of hash out a little bit more of what the Clean Missouri Initiative was originally when it came on to the ballot. However, I asked him very pointedly and said, there is some concern that you brought forward this bill so that this three-part amendment could be tacked on, and it's the third of those three parts that people are concerned about with keeping lawmakers' emails and electronic communications that have any kind of opinion or advice out of the public eye. He said fervently no, but I think dissenters are having trouble agreeing with
Stephen, why should we care?
We should care because transparency, when media or anyone is able to look at public documents, sometimes that exposes or leads you down a path to finding something that is going wrong. 62% of people in the state voted for something. And in a story that I did just yesterday, seeing multiple times in the past 20 years lawmakers overturning the will of the people, I asked Governor Mike Parson about it. He didn't give me a direct answer. He says you have to be careful about overturning the will of the people, but in his words, sometimes lawmakers, if they see something wrong, they should fix it.
You know, this is an enormous overreaction to the Clean Missouri vote, Nick. This is equivalent to putting a blanket, a shroud of darkness over the way government operates in Missouri. You know, this is not what voters asked for in Missouri. It's not where voters many voters in Kansas want to be right now. And I think people need to pay attention to what's going on here because it would fundamentally change the relationship between state government and the people it governs.
Yeah, we should care because important stories are revealed by documents that are obtained under open records
That's
laws.
right.
Much of the Eric Greitens story was based on open records. Much of what we're learning about Josh Hawley and his use of private emails and text messaging devices is based on open records. Much of what we know about the family services in Kansas, including, by the way, this decision to award a Florida company some contracts that they didn't even apply for, that's based on open records. You know, taxpayers pay for those things. They don't belong to the governor or to department heads. They belong to the people, and the people have an absolute right to read them, and great stories are developed because of it.
I just want to say one thing about this that most voters may not know, and I didn't know until I talked to a source inside Jeff City. They say this is actually a very partisan issue. Democrats have always kind of looked at state lawmakers as falling under the Sunshine Law requirements. Republicans, however, have always been very concerned about whether or not the legislative branch falls under the Sunshine Law requirements, and that's why we're automatically seeing this pushback from Republicans.
Now, just because you went to university to study English or philosophy or engineering or political science doesn't mean our young people want to. I wouldn't be doing my job as a conveyor of the most important news of the week without mentioning how Park University this week opened Kansas City's newest arena for gamers. You heard that right. Park University is the first area college to offer a varsity esports program, and then now have the Parkade Battleground Arena in which to compete. They're even offering scholarships for people to join. So you can actually now get paid in Kansas City for twiddling your thumbs and playing video games, Stephen?
Video games are fun. I stand by that message. Hey, now is it an NCAA D1 sport? Not really, but a lot of people, I mean, it takes a lot of skills, hand-eye coordination, yada, yada, yada. I don't know about scholarships.
But they say this is actually one of the biggest rising industries in the entire world right now is esports as a business. They're telling you about that business. Is it any different than learning journalism or going to study film studies?
Yes, very much so, Nick. And sometimes the world changes so fast, you can't even keep up with it. Just because it's changing doesn't mean it's for the best.
There may be more jobs, though, in esports.
Maybe that's
I don't think I've ever actually played a video game ever in my life, but I was. But
not even Pac-Man.
Come on, not even Pac-Man. Maybe the Pong thing. Maybe I did that at a legislative bill. But just quickly, I watched some of this the other day. TV stations now, some sports stations carry these esports.
Yes,
it's about as boring as
drone
watching.
racing too.
Yeah, drone racing is cool.
It's horrible.
So they are doing that, and they might even become a prime time little addition to
ESPN was carrying
KCTV5.
drone racing the other day, and I did watch about 5 minutes of it.
Cool.
All right, that is our weekly review. Our thanks to our week's reviewers from 41 Action News, Stephen Dial, and from your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. Keeping you up to date on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske, and KCTV5's Caroline Sweeney. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.